Hey guys, welcome to Ayana's DIY Corner. My name is Ayana, and on this channel I share with you guys DIY tips and tricks to help you create that individual unique closet or even some great home decor ideas that you will want to try out. This video is going to be one of many that I will be posting throughout this week, and it is geared towards those that are really interested into getting into sewing, but they feel a bit intimidating because, let's be honest, there are so many sewing tools out there. It can be a bit overwhelming. One minute you're seeing this and the next minute you see someone else using something else and they're saying this is, so it can be a bit intimidating. And I'm also going to make you a little more comfortable with sewing machines by going through the different parts and their functions. So with all that said, let's get into it. Let's start off with the sewing machine. Now, sewing machines vary. You have the ones that come with the dials, like mine, and then you have those that comes with the digital areas where you can actually select everything that you need with your stitches, your stitch size, and your tension. You could actually select that with the digital panel that most of the machines come with. One dial is going to be dedicated to the stitch patterns that the sewing machine is capable of doing. Then you have another dial dedicated to the tension of the sewing machine. Alright, and you always want to pay very close attention to the tension of the sewing machine. Alright, because different fabrics normally use different tension, and you always have to be adjusting your tension dial whenever you're doing different projects, because again, different fabrics will take different tension for the project. The next dial will be your stitch length dial, so you also want to pay attention to that as well, because you're gonna have some parts in your projects where you may need to use a very wide stitch, a very long stitch, especially when you're doing projects where you have to gather the material and you use the very long stitches, right, to actually execute that type of thing. So you always want to pay attention to your stitch length dial. Another thing with the sewing machine that you want to pay attention to is your reverse or back stitch button, right? But some machines don't have a button. They actually have a lever that you have to press down and hold down to be able to do a back stitch. So normally when you hear me in some of my projects or even in other videos with other sewers, and you may hear them say just back stitch, do a little back stitch, that back stitch happens when you press down your reverse button or hold down your reverse button. Also have a presser foot. This is what is used to keep your fabric into place, keep your fabric in place on your sewing machine bed. So this whole part here is called your sewing machine bed. This is where you do all your work. This is where your fabric lays nicely, and then your presser foot keeps that in place. Now my presser foot lever, as you can see right here, is at the back of my sewing machine. On some sewing machines it's on the side. I even saw one sewing machine where it is actually on the inside. Around this area here, the lever is right there where you can control your presser foot. So it's up for you to place the fabric, and then you drop it down to keep that fabric in place before you start stitching. Right along here is the area where you'll be placing your needle your sewing machine needle, and you always want to make sure that it is nice and tight and in place before you start stitching. All right, now this little silver plate area here, most machines have it silver as a silver plating, a steel plating, a metal plating. Some machines have it like a plastic, a hard plastic casing, and some of them come with measurements going along them. You would see half, a quarter, 1, and those are in inches. And what it does is actually help you keep your hem gauge measurement. So let's say you are stitching a seam, a hem, or whatever, and you want it to be 1 inch or ½ inch or ¼ inch. Some machines come with that measurement on the plate that can help you keep that gauge. It is also an area where you slide open to get access to your bobbin case. All right, and that bobbin case is where you will place your spool of thread. All right, now to thread your spool, that area is normally at the top right hand corner of your sewing machine. All right, right here. This is where you'll take your empty spool, place it, and pay attention to your sewing machine manual so that you know how to thread your machine to be able to thread your spools. All right, if you are like me and your sewing machine is a hand-me-down, a very good hand-me-down, and you don't have a sewing machine manual, or the person that gave you the sewing machine didn't give you a crash course on how to use that machine, YouTube is a blessing. It is a great teaching tool. Just pay attention to the model of your sewing machine, and most of the times you see the model of the sewing machine somewhere to the back, and just type that in and see how they thread the machine to be able to thread the spool. Pay attention to how they place the spool into the bobbin casing. This is all if you do not have a handbook for your sewing machine, or maybe you do have a handbook and you still don't understand what the heck that sewing machine manual is telling you. YouTube is a great teaching platform for you to go and just find that sewing machine that you have and see how to thread that spool and then place that thread spool within your bobbin case. All right, so that's basically it for the sewing machine. Just keep in mind, if you're going out there to purchase yourself a sewing machine, keep in mind the budget you're working with. And it's okay if you have a sewing machine with dials. It's okay if the sewing machine is probably not one of these sorts of rugged, heavy-duty type of sewing machine. The most important thing is that you are now starting and you want something that you feel comfortable with, that you can get familiarized with very quickly. So just keep all of that in mind when you are purchasing a sewing machine. There are a lot of sewers out on YouTube and they are showing you all the latest sewing machines out there, and that's great. But as a beginner, I would recommend you start off with your very first sewing machine being one that does not intimidate you with all the glitz, glamour, and gadgets. You want one that you're gonna feel comfortable learning, picking it up quickly, and once you have that down and you realize that sewing is really something you're passionate about and you enjoy doing, invest in one of those great sewing machines that it has out there now. But for now, as a beginner, I will recommend, when it comes to the sewing machine, I would recommend you get yourself one that is not as intimidating and is easy for you to pick up. Let's get into those basic tools. First, let's look at rulers. You want to get yourself a yardstick. It comes in handy when you have to get those nice long measurements. All right, so get yourself a yardstick. They're very reasonable in price. You also want to get yourself French curls. So I have a packet here, a packet of 3, and they come in different sizes. And I find this very helpful, especially when you are creating patterns. It helps you with armhole curves, it helps you with crotch curves, with anything that has to be curved. These French curves come in handy, and you want to get yourself a 3 set where you have different sizes, because most of the times having this big one alone, it's kind of difficult for you to get smaller curves proper and precise. All right, get yourself a measuring tape. Another thing you want to get, and I can't seem to find, I think I may have lost it, is a is a seam gauge. All right, now a seam gauge is used to help you ensure that you are using the correct measurements for your seams or your hems. So let's just say you want to give yourself 1 inch seam allowance. You always, in my videos when I'm doing anything, you will probably hear me say, give yourself 1 inch seam allowance, give yourself 1/2 inch seam allowance, or 1/4 inch seam allowance. The seam gauge helps you to measure out that if you are not able to eyeball what a 1/2 inch seam allowance or 1 inch seam allowance or 1/4 inch seam allowance looks like at first glance. All right, over time you will get accustomed and you may not really need the gauge per se, but that gauge is really there to help you place it and measure it out on your fabric and mark off, okay, this is it here, my 1 inch seam allowance, or oh, this is my 1.5 seam inch allowance. So the gauge is really there to help you measure that. Let's get into the scissors. I have 3 here for the purpose of the video, but again, if you look to the back of me, I don't know if you can see, like right here, I have like 1, I have 2 scissors right here. These are what I use on non-fabric stuff that I have to cut, and over here right now I have 1 and oh my god, okay, so it's 1 and 2. Okay, those are 2 out of my 4 fabric scissors. All right, so these are my other 2 fabric scissors here, and this is my one of the 3 non-fabric scissors that I have. Now the reason why I have so many scissors is this. When it comes to fabric scissors, I always use different weights when it comes to fabric. So I have lightweight fabric I work with, and then I have heavyweight material fabric that I work with, like denim. I will have, so for instance, this one I would use for a lot of my lightweight fabric, like the cottons and the linens and whatever else that is very light. I use this scissors. So this scissors is used for that and that alone. This scissor I use on my denim. So if I am working with denim or a very heavy material, a heavy fabric, most of the times I'm also doing using a lot of upholstery fabric, because I do a lot of DIY, home DIYs as well. This is the scissors I use for heavy materials such as denim and upholstery fabric. I even use this for leatherettes. All right, for non-fabric materials. You also want to get yourself some snippers. I call them snippers because they just snip loose thread. Okay, so when you are finished running your stitch on your sewing machine, you take one of your snippers and you snip away the threading. Come in. They are also great for opening out seams if your seam ripper seems to be giving problems. And as I said, seam ripper, you also want to get your hands on some seam rippers. Now currently my seam rippers are going through it. They are missing their little ball at the edge, and the balls on these seam rippers are really to help guide the seam ripper with so much ease, so you can just and seam rip it. Most of the times it's not that easy. Some of these seams you seam rip open sorry, is a bit difficult, and even though you have the ball to guide that whole process, it's still very difficult. And you're seeing that I have two. That's because in case I can't find one, the other one is somewhere close by. And that's the same thing for my snippers. I have two because in case one is somewhere and I don't know, the other one is right there for me to use. All right. What the wheel does, the pattern wheel does, is that it helps you to actually trace around, and then these little spokes, all right, the little spokes leave indentures on your fabric so that you're able to see where you have to cut. All right, and you also want to get some tailor chalk, or you can use a water-based marker. Now there are markers that you can purchase specifically for marking patterns, all right, and they can wash off if by any chance they remain on the fabric after you create the piece that you're creating. All right, another thing you want to get are some tweezers, some crafting tweezers. Now I say this because I find it comes in handy. Sometimes you are sewing and you find that the thread snags somewhere in your machine and you can't really get into that crease where it is. I always find these tweezers come in handy to get into those little crevices and just pull that thread out. All right, so having these is very helpful in your toolkits. Get yourself a lot of pins, a lot of pins. You also want to get yourself a pin cushion. I would recommend getting the pin cushion for your wrist. You know, there is the pin cushion that you can have on your wrist like a band, and you just have the pins right there, easy access. But for me, I have mine in a nice little bucket, so wherever I am, the bucket is with me and I can take my pins out when I need them. Another great thing to have are crafting clips. All right, I have them in small and I also have them in large, and these come in handy, especially for projects where you don't necessarily need to use pins and you can just clip your fabric pieces together to be able to run your stitch by your sewing machine. So get yourself some craft clips if you are able to. If you aren't able to get yourself the craft clips, the needles, the pins, sorry, are just as great. All right. Also make sure you have yourself some safety pins, and get yourself these safety pins in different sizes. All right, because sometimes you have projects where you probably have to pull a piece of elastic through a casing or pull a piece of string through a casing, and you need to have pins to help you with that. Now there are tools that you can use specifically for pulling things through casings, but I always find pins more effective and it moves a little quicker. If you can, only if you can, all right, get yourself a heater, a nice small iron. Now I love this iron. My mom actually bought this for me, and I find it very helpful, especially when you have to press open seams to add a zipper, or press your seams, or even when you are using interfacing to strengthen things. And I use interfacing a lot when I'm creating waistbands for my pants, or probably using it to create bags. I use my iron to, you know, fuse my interfacing with my fabrics. All right, now if you are unable right away to get one of these nice small irons, I would recommend you use a normal iron. It really doesn't matter. This is no different from your normal big irons. I just find it's more convenient when it comes to sewing projects. I just find it more convenient to have this because it's so small and precise, and it's easy for you to actually press those seams out, especially if you're just focusing on seams. It helps a lot. It's very precise. But if you cannot get this off the bat right away, a normal iron would work just as great. Threads. Now, as you can see, I have a bag of threads of all colors. You may not be able to get, you know, a whole bag of threads in one go. What I would recommend is this, your prime colors and thread. If you can get the big rolls, now they normally use these on the serger machines. I would recommend you get your prime colors with these large rolls. Even if you don't have a serger just yet, because I don't have a serger and I'm sewing just as fine still. If you do not have a serger, it doesn't matter. Again, get yourself these large rolls in your prime colors, and your prime colors will be like the black, white, brown. Brown is also a good color to get in these big rolls. All right, get yourself prime colors. If you can get 2 of each of your prime colors, that will be great. And when it comes to all the different colors in the rainbow, you can go ahead and get the normal small rolls of thread, and over time, every time you go to your local craft store to pick up something for your sewing corner or your little sewing toolkit, always pick up threads. Always pick up threads. It doesn't matter if you need it or not. If you can pick up 2 every time you go to your local craft store, that'll be great. I have so many different shades of red in this bag. So many different shades of green and purples and oranges, and they always come in handy whenever I'm doing a project. Sometimes I'm like, oh my god, do I even have that color? And then I'll go through my thread bag and I'll realize, oh, look at right here, the exact shade. So whenever you get the chance, whenever you are picking up colors, always get different shades in every color. And again, you don't have to get everything in one go. Just pick up Let's say one time you go to the craft store, pick up yourself a red, a blue, a green, a orange, a yellow. The next time you go, you just pick up a purple, a black, a blue, and as you go along, just pick up different shades in it. Different shades in every color that you have home, just pick up a different shade. And eventually your thread counts will be amazing. Okay, trust me, it comes in handy. Get yourself a packet of hand needles, because you can never tell what project you're doing. You might reach a particular area that you're getting some problems to get access to with the sewing machine, and you may have to go in with some hand needle, you know, needle and thread. So get yourself a nice wheel with hand needles. All right, that comes in handy as well. And another thing you want to do is get yourself a lot of these spools for your thread. All right, pay attention to the spools you're using for your sewing machine. What I normally do, I always forget. Some of these spools that comes with the sewing machine, they actually have a number on them. If you pay attention, there's a number on them. And when you go to your local craft store or sewing store, all you need to do is match the number that you're seeing on that spool and get it. If they don't come with numbers, simply take one of your spools when you're going to your craft or sewing store, take it with you, and just ask someone for some assistance to help you get the right one, and purchase yourself a few of them. You know, I have more than these, but for the sake of this video, I just have them out to show you. But it's always good to have a few of these so that each of them can get a different color, because the last thing you want is when you're actually doing a project and the thread on that particular spool you're using in your bobbin has finished, and if you don't have a spare one lying around, it is really irritating when you have to stop your entire project just to thread that spool all over again. So have a few, and if the project you're doing requires you to have, let's say, green, thread about 4 of those spools with green. So you will be prepared for that project and you won't have to worry. All right, so there you have it, guys. I hope this video helps when it comes to the sewing machine, and I also hope it helps when it comes to the tools. At the end of this video, I will put a quick pick up with all the tools, and also a pic of sewing machine and the different parts of the sewing machine. So guys, look out for the next video where I would be sharing and talking on the different size sewing machine needles and the fabrics they work best with and different stitches. So guys, till next time, this is